Imagine walking through a quiet park on a spring afternoon, believing life is perfectly under control until you see a little girl collapse right in front of you. Her tiny hands clutch a paper bag that spills to the ground, revealing just 2 crackers and a bruised apple. In that moment, a powerful choice is made: to walk away like everyone else, or to kneel down, hold her hand, and refuse to let go. What this man did not know was that the child's fragile heartbeat carried a secret that connected directly to his own, a past sacrifice, a mother's final gift, and a bond written not by blood, but by destiny. This is not just a story of survival. It's a story of second chances, of love discovered in the most unexpected place, and of a promise that changes everything. Stay with us and subscribe to the Retold Stories for more unforgettable journeys. James Miles had spent most of his life believing that success could fill every void. At 42, he was the founder and chief executive officer of Cascade Shores, a luxury eco-resort chain stretching from the San Juan Islands down the Oregon coast. His home was perched high above the Seattle skyline, glass walls capturing sunsets that spilled gold over the city. His calendar overflowed with meetings, deals, and appointments, and every suit in his wardrobe was tailored so sharply that a single wrinkle would have felt like failure. To the outside world, James was enviable, untouchable, and perhaps even complete. Yet, on the rare afternoon when he decided to walk through Green Lake Park, he felt something unexpected pressing in on him. The stillness around him was not peace. It was emptiness, deep and heavy. A reminder that wealth could not disguise silence. The park was alive in a way his penthouse never was. Families lay sprawled on blankets, their laughter carried by the breeze. Children chased each other, their sneakers thudding across the grass, while parents leaned close, sharing sandwiches and private smiles. A couple sat with their fingers brushing lightly, speaking without words, and James watched them for longer than he intended. Something inside him shifted, an ache he could not name, the faint pull of a life he had never truly built. It was not because he lacked the ability, but because somewhere along the climb to success, he had stopped trying. The path curved beneath budding cherry blossoms, petals scattering like fragile confetti across the pavement. James slowed, his polished shoes tapping softly on the cement. That was when he noticed her. A small girl, no more than 6, walked carefully along the sidewalk ahead of him. She wore a pale yellow cardigan with one button askew, as though no one had helped her dress that morning. In her hand, she clutched a crumpled paper bag, holding it with the same seriousness one might give to treasure. Her steps were deliberate, uncertain, as though every inch required determination far greater than her size. James's stride faltered. There was something about the way she moved, a fragile determination that reminded him of someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear. He had seen executives buckle under pressure, competitors crack beneath expectation, but never a child. 20 feet ahead, her small frame wavered. The paper bag slipped from her fingers, its contents spilling 2 crackers and a bruised apple rolling across the path. Her knees buckled, her body swayed, and before James could fully register what was happening, she collapsed onto the hard cement. His instincts took over before his mind caught up. He was running, his expensive shoes sliding on the grit of the sidewalk, his breath sharp against his ribs. Dropping to his knees, he reached for her, his suit scraping against the pavement without hesitation, her head lolled to the side, her skin pale beneath the flush of fever. When he brushed the damp strands of hair from her forehead, heat burned against his palm, unnatural and alarming. "Hey, stay with me," James urged, his voice low but urgent. He shifted her gently so that her head rested in the crook of his arm. Her lips were dry, her breathing shallow, her small hand limp in his own. He squeezed it anyway, firm and reassuring, as if the pressure of his grip could tether her to consciousness. Fear surged through him, raw and unfiltered, unlike anything he had felt even in the most dangerous boardroom battles. Around them, the world moved with disturbing indifference. A jogger slowed, but did not stop. A mother with a stroller crossed to the grass to avoid them. James felt the cold blade of contrast this little girl's life could be slipping away, and yet strangers passed by as if it were nothing more than a scene in the background. Her eyelids fluttered. A faint groan escaped her throat. He leaned closer, desperate for connection. "Sweetheart," "Can you tell me your name?" For a moment there was silence, and then a fragile whisper, barely audible. "Olivia." Her eyes rolled back, and she drifted again, consciousness slipping like sand through fingers. James gripped her small hand tighter, refusing to let go. He turned sharply. "Call emergency services!" His voice cut across the park. Somewhere behind him, someone responded. A phone dialing, the faint sound of a speaker engaged. Within minutes, the wail of sirens approached, slicing through the deceptive calm of the spring afternoon. James stayed bent over her, one hand pressed to her forehead, the other clasping her tiny fingers. He whispered words without thinking. Promises meant more for himself than for her. When paramedics arrived, efficient and calm, they lowered a stretcher and gently lifted her from his arms. James's grip did not release until the last possible moment. "I'm coming with her," he said firmly, his tone leaving no space for argument. The paramedics exchanged glances but nodded, making room for him in the ambulance. He climbed inside, settling on the narrow bench, his gaze locked on the small girl lying beneath an oxygen mask. Machines beeped steadily, numbers flashing on monitors, but all James saw was the fragile rise and fall of her chest. As the vehicle sped toward Seattle Children's Hospital, James sat in silence, his heart pounding in rhythm with the siren. He had no answers: who she was, where she came from, why she was alone, but he knew one thing with certainty. Until someone could prove she was safe, he would not let go. The ambulance doors burst open beneath the hospital's harsh lights. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, sharp and metallic, and James followed as they wheeled her swiftly into the pediatric emergency wing. For a man who had built empires and signed contracts worth millions, there was a helplessness in that moment unlike anything he had known. He stayed close, gripping the railing of the stretcher as though it anchored him too. Inside the unit, nurses converged, attaching sensors, checking vitals, speaking in brisk, efficient tones. A doctor introduced himself, but James barely registered the words. All he saw was Olivia, her tiny body dwarfed by the hospital bed, her fingers twitching faintly against the sheets. The sight hollowed him out. For years, James had thought survival meant numbers in the bank, towers in the skyline, and his name on headlines. But as he stood there, watching this child fight for each breath, survival took on a different meaning. It was fragile, intimate, and unbearably human. Something in him shifted, though he did not yet understand it. All he knew was that he was not leaving. Not until Olivia opened her eyes again. The hospital room was filled with the soft hum of machines, the rhythmic beep of monitors, and the shuffle of footsteps from nurses moving briskly in and out. James sat stiffly in the chair beside Olivia's bed, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles turned pale. He had told himself he was only there until she stabilized, that once the doctors assured him she was safe, he could return to his carefully ordered life. But as the minutes stretched into hours, he found he could not step away. Something in her presence held him there. Something deeper than obligation. When Dr. Patel entered with a clipboard and calm authority, James braced himself. The diagnosis came with a weight that pressed against the walls of the room. Advanced leukemia. The words felt clinical, precise, but behind them was the undeniable truth. This child's time was running out. James listened as Patel explained transfusions, treatments, and the urgent need for a bone marrow transplant. Each sentence seemed to chip away at the illusion of control James had always relied upon. In business, he could strategize, invest, negotiate. Here, none of that mattered. Mara Lawson arrived soon after, her dark hair pulled into a practical bun, her badge identifying her as Child Protective Services. She spoke with professionalism, yet her eyes softened as they lingered on Olivia. The girl had been abandoned, Mara explained, left behind by a temporary guardian 2 weeks earlier. No relatives had been located. No one had come forward. She was, in every sense, alone. James felt something cold settle deep in his stomach. When Olivia stirred slightly, whispering her mother's name in her fevered haze, James froze. Jessica Harper. The syllable struck him like a thunderclap. He remembered the letter that had arrived a year ago, signed by the Harper family, telling him that the young woman who had died had loved the water, and that he should live for them both. Jessica Harper had been his donor. Her heart beat in his chest, and now her daughter lay before him, fighting for her life. The connection was impossible to ignore. Destiny had brought him here, to this child, to this moment. James leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as fragments of memory returned the cold ICU air, the heavy consent forms, the tremor in his hands as the cardiologist told him they had found a match. He had been saved because of Jessica. Now Jessica's daughter needed saving, and the circle demanded to be closed. "I want to be tested," James said suddenly, turning to Dr. Patel. The physician hesitated, reminding him that being a heart recipient did not guarantee compatibility for bone marrow donation. But James's tone left no room for negotiation. "Run the test," he insisted. For the first time in years, his voice was not the commanding register of a CEO, but the plea of a man who had found something worth more than all the contracts he had ever signed. Later that evening, James was led through the sterile halls to the pathology lab. A nurse tied a tourniquet around his arm, the elastic bite sharp against his skin. As the needle pierced his vein and the vials filled with dark red, he felt the weight of his choice. This was no longer about heroics or appearances. This was about responsibility, about gratitude, about giving back the life that had once been given to him. Mara met him afterward in a small, paper-cluttered office, her eyes skeptical but not unkind. "You were serious about this?" she asked, glancing at the stack of guardianship forms before her. James nodded without hesitation. He was not content to be a distant benefactor or a man who wrote checks to ease his conscience. He wanted to be there, to fight for Olivia as if she were his own. "I am not her guardian," he said firmly. "I am her family." The words surprised even him, yet once spoken, they felt undeniable. Mara studied him, then allowed herself the faintest smile, though her tone remained measured. She warned him of the bureaucracy, the endless paperwork, the hearings and evaluations. But James only leaned forward, unwavering. "I do not need applause. I need permission to protect her." Days later, when the results returned, Patel entered the room with a folder in his hands and a cautious expression. James rose to his feet, his pulse pounding. "You are a match," the doctor said at last. Relief crashed through James so violently that he had to grip the back of the chair to steady himself. It was as though the universe had confirmed what his heart already knew. This was not coincidence, it was destiny. But destiny did not move without obstacles. Just as preparations began, Mara appeared in the hallway one evening, her expression grave. Olivia's former guardian, Diane Carter, had filed an objection to James's temporary custody. Though she had abandoned the child, she now claimed ignorance, insisting she had left Olivia with a friend and had intended to return. The law, Mara explained, required a hearing. Until then, the transplant could not proceed. The courtroom was stark, polished floors, echoing with every step. James stood beside his attorney, Elena Ward, while across the aisle, Diane sat stiffly, avoiding his gaze. The judge, an older woman with silver hair, listened as both sides presented their cases. Elena spoke with urgency, detailing Diane's negligence, James's commitment, and the medical necessity of immediate guardianship. Diane's lawyer attempted weak justifications, but when the judge asked Diane directly where Olivia had slept the night before she collapsed, her silence said more than any excuse could. When it was James's turn to testify, he rose and faced the court. His words were steady, not rehearsed, but drawn from the deepest well of truth he possessed. He spoke of the moment he found Olivia, of the terror in seeing her so fragile, and of the letter from Jessica Harper that had once saved his life. "She was left behind once," he said, his voice carrying through the hushed chamber. "That cannot happen again." The judge's gavel struck, granting James temporary full custody and medical authority. For the first time since Olivia had fallen in the park, hope felt real. James returned to the hospital with renewed determination, sitting once more at her bedside. When she opened her eyes weakly and asked, "Are you going to stay?" he did not hesitate. "Always," he whispered, and this time he knew it was not a promise he would break. The days that followed were filled with a strange mixture of dread and fragile hope. Olivia's hospital room became a small universe where every heartbeat mattered and every sigh of the machines felt like a fragile tether to the future. James rarely left her side. His penthouse, his business empire, his overflowing schedule, all of it faded into the background. What mattered was here, within these four walls, beside a girl whose presence had altered his very understanding of life. Preparations for the transplant consumed the hospital. Nurses moved with efficient purpose, doctors spoke in low tones, and forms were signed with the weight of finality. James underwent additional physicals, his body prodded and measured to ensure he was strong enough to donate. The ache in his chest was not fear of the procedure itself, but fear of what would happen if they waited too long. Each day he watched Olivia grow more tired, her laughter fading into soft whispers, her smiles lasting only moments before exhaustion pulled them away. One morning Olivia looked at him with eyes that seemed older than her 6 years. "What if I do not wake up?" she asked quietly, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. James reached for her hand, holding it gently but firmly, as if anchoring her to the earth. "Then I will wait," he said softly, "like a knight outside your castle, until you open your eyes again." She considered his words, her expression thoughtful, and then gave the smallest nod, as though granting him permission to keep his promise. The morning of the transplant arrived wrapped in gray Seattle skies, rain tracing thin lines down the hospital windows. The halls were quieter than usual, as if even the building understood the gravity of the day. James dressed in surgical scrubs, the hospital band tight around his wrist. Olivia wore a lavender gown, her hair braided gently by one of the nurses. She clutched her dolphin pillow and the seashell necklace that had once belonged to her mother. When the nurses came to wheel her away, James bent down so their faces were level. She reached up, touching the faint scar beneath his shirt collar. "That is where Mommy helped you," she whispered. James nodded. "Yes, and today I get to help you." She blinked slowly, then let the nurses guide her bed toward the double doors. His heart pounded as she disappeared into the operating wing. In the surgical prep room, Dr. Patel explained the procedure once more, but James barely heard him. He lay on the sterile table, the lights above dimming, as anesthesia pulled him under. His last memory before sleep was of Olivia's small hand resting in his, a fragile connection that felt unbreakable. When he woke, his lower back throbbed with a deep ache. The room swam into focus, and beside him sat Mara Lawson, her tablet closed in her lap. She leaned forward as soon as his eyes opened. "She is okay," she said gently. Relief swept over him, heavy and overwhelming. The transplant had gone smoothly, and Olivia was stable. Despite protests from the nurses, James demanded to be taken to her room. They wheeled him down the corridor, his body weak but his will unyielding. When the door opened, he saw her lying peacefully, a monitor tracking her heartbeat with steady rhythm. Her small chest rose and fell beneath the blanket, and her seashell necklace glinted softly under the fluorescent lights. James reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. They did not move, but they were warm. "I am here," he whispered. "I will not leave." The days after the surgery were a blur of recovery. James felt the dull pain of the marrow extraction, but he welcomed it. Pain was proof that he had given something, that his life had meaning beyond profit and contracts. For tensioning Olivia, the path was uncertain. Some mornings she woke with color in her cheeks, her laughter filling the room as she teased him for coloring outside the lines in her books. Other days she lay quiet, her body fighting battles too heavy for her size. James stayed through it all, reading stories, holding her hand, and whispering promises into the stillness. Outside the hospital, the world moved on. Shareholders questioned his absence, emails piled high, deals waited for signatures, but James no longer measured time in quarterly reports. He measured it in heartbeats, in the quiet hum of machines, in the fragile smile of a child who was slowly becoming his daughter. When the doctors finally allowed them to move into a family suite, James discovered a different kind of home. The room was small, furnished with twin beds and a narrow dresser, but it was alive in a way his penthouse had never been. Crayons rolled underfoot, Olivia's laughter echoed against the walls, and the sterile air was replaced with the scent of syrup from cafeteria pancakes. For the first time in years, James felt like he belonged somewhere. Yet challenges lingered. Diane Carter continued her legal maneuvers, filing appeals and objections. But James was no longer intimidated. He had faced boardrooms filled with ruthless men, yet nothing compared to the determination that filled him when he looked at Olivia. He would fight every legal battle, endure every obstacle, to protect her. She had been left behind once. He would not allow it again. As the weeks passed, Olivia's strength grew. The dark circles beneath her eyes faded, replaced by the sparkle of mischief. She drew pictures of butterflies and hearts, taping them to the walls. In one drawing, she sketched herself, her mother with wings, and James with a bright red heart on his chest. Above them all, a butterfly soared. James kept that drawing close, a reminder that transformation was possible, that pain could give way to renewal. A year later, Green Lake Park bloomed once more with cherry blossoms. James walked hand in hand with Olivia, who wore a sunshine yellow dress and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her still-growing hair. She skipped beside him, her laughter clear and free. They stopped by the very spot where he had first found her collapsed, and she looked up at him with bright eyes. "You came," she said simply. James knelt down, pulling her into his arms. "I will always come," he whispered. She unfolded a drawing from her pocket, showing the two of them together. A large red heart above their heads, with Jessica's name written inside. "Mom gave you her heart," Olivia said softly. "And you gave me yours." James blinked quickly, his throat tightening as he pressed the drawing against his chest. Together they ran across the grass, a red kite with a white butterfly trailing behind them, soaring higher into the spring sky. Petals swirled through the air like confetti, and for the first time, James understood that the loop had closed not in tragedy, but in renewal. He had found not only purpose but family, and in giving his marrow he had given something greater, a promise that neither of them would ever face the world alone again. Life has a way of weaving threads we cannot see until they come together in unexpected patterns. For James Miles, the man who once believed power and wealth could fill the silence, it took the collapse of a little girl on a park sidewalk to unravel everything he thought he knew. What began as a single act of compassion revealed a truth too profound to ignore, that the heart beating inside his chest belonged to her mother, and the marrow of his bones was destined to keep her alive. Olivia was not just a child in need. She was the continuation of a promise that had begun long before James understood it. Her mother's final gift had saved him, and in return, he found himself offering everything he had to protect the daughter she left behind. What the world might call coincidence, James knew was something more. It was destiny, a circle of giving that bound them together, not by blood, but by love and sacrifice. Through sleepless nights in hospital rooms, through the ache of waiting for test results, through the weight of legal battles that threatened to tear them apart, James discovered something far greater than success. He discovered family. He discovered the strength that comes not from titles or fortune, but from refusing to let go when someone needs you most. Olivia's laughter, once fragile, returned brighter than the spring blossoms that framed their first meeting. Her drawings of butterflies and hearts became symbols of hope, not just for herself, but for James too. Every smile, every step she took after the transplant, reminded him that the life he had been given was never meant to be lived for himself alone. It was meant to be shared, to be poured into another, to honor the love of a mother who was gone yet present in every heartbeat. And so the story does not end with survival. It begins with transformation. From a CEO defined by boardrooms and skyscrapers to a guardian defined by love, James's journey shows us that redemption does not always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it comes in holding a child's hand, in sitting quietly beside her bed, in choosing again and again to stay. Olivia was given a future because someone refused to walk away. James was given a new life because destiny offered him a second chance to love. Together they remind us that even in the darkest of circumstances, there is light to be found, and family can be born not only from blood but from the courage to care. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that every act of kindness has the power to change more than one life. And if you want to continue experiencing stories that inspire hope, healing, and the beauty of human connection, we invite you to subscribe to the Retold Stories, because sometimes the stories we share are the very ones that help us find our way back to what matters most.